Hey guys, this week I want to talk about the fact that a lot of people tell me what to do and what not to do with the channel. A lot of people are reacting lately, and I do have a lot of passion for what I'm doing, and that's what I always wanted to give to people. And overall, I think the channel is going and growing in the right way. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that people are just avoiding to talk about because there is no monetary value or there's no real thought behind it. Everyone goes on the same train, on the same boat, and not following the whole history of what we have been living over the past 50, 100 years, and companies have been doing amazing things. Which brings me to today's video. I want to talk about 5 brands that are really close to me, that I really appreciate personally. I also collect a few of those. I love them in terms of quality, in terms of heritage, in terms of their history, and they did stuff in the past that was really cool. They are doing really amazing things, and one brand in particular is actually going to do some really cool stuff in the near future, and we're going to talk all about those right now. A lot of people talk to me about prestige and background and something recognizable. But in the past, I'd say 5 to 10 years, there's been a shift from giving a lot of energy and love to watches to giving a lot of energy and love to 4 or 5 major brands that honestly, they're not doing amazing things. They're just doing the same sauce, and they're just like remixing it in different ways. I'm talking about AP, Rolex, Patek, which right now is on the chopping block by a lot of people with what happened with the Stern family. Everyone knows about the Cubitus and the story behind it. A lot of YouTubers have actually covered that aspect of what happened in the past 3-4 months, and it's very deceiving to actually see a company that's been a leader and very highly respected in the past going in a direction where they don't really care about anyone. They're just caring about an image that doesn't really reflect what people think about Patek, and that kind of leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth and to a lot of people, to see that actually they really don't care about their customers. They really don't care about people that actually will or think about buying the brand or buying secondhand watches of the brand. It is utterly insulting to the whole community, and I think that people reacted in that way, and I am also very, very touched by that, by the fact that he actually said that they never actually took a designer outside of the company to design their watches, and yet their biggest result so far in terms of sales is with the Nautilus that was designed by Gerald Genta. And it's honestly, it just makes me sad overall to see that those leaders should be humbled and should be actually very, very respectful of the market and of people that are actually supporting them. Passing on to the next few brands, you have Omega that's doing super well, but again, Omega, I just find they're always super scattered. There's a lot of other brands that are doing amazing things right now, and we're gonna dive in with one of my preferred brands of all time. It's Zenith. I do have 3 watches right now. Today I'm gonna start with the watch I'm wearing. We're gonna take a few pictures. It's a Zenith 120T caliber, railroad grade, very high grade movement from the 60s and I think maybe late 50s. I do have 2 of them. They're extremely rare. We see maybe a few of them appearing on the market throughout the world, and they did some amazing things, including watches for the Canadian Railroad, which was really strong back in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And in Canada, we do have a lot of history with that. We can talk about that another time, but this is one of my really preferred watches. I do have something on the website that's super cool and that people don't really know about. If you know about Zenith, most probably one of the most famous calibers that everyone knows about is the Zenith El Primero. But in reality, the most famous caliber and actually the most voted caliber and most respected caliber by Zenith is the caliber 135. It was voted as the top movement from the 20th century, and this is derived from the 135. This is the caliber 40 or 40T. This is something really cool. It was one of my personal watches. I actually sold it about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, before opening the store to a customer, bought it back. So now it's available on the website. That's something super cool. You can get an amazing watch with an amazing condition case, perfect dial. It's really as clean as they get, you know, for the age, and it does have the original crown. It's simply gorgeous. If no one buys it, I think in the next few months I'm most probably gonna keep it for myself. There's no reason actually not to keep such a beauty. And the fact that it's derived from a high grade caliber that won actually a lot of prizes in the observatory competition back from 1948 until 1954, the caliber 135. They actually wanted to make something a bit more affordable, something that was more common, easily reproduced, and that's the caliber 40 or 40T. That's one of them, and this is one of the earlier ones with the golden finish on the movement, which means that the later ones are zinc plated, which makes them look like stainless. Very high quality movement. This watch is as classic as it gets, and it does look like a Calatrava with its simplicity, with its perfectly edged case. The finishing is good. It's all the sides are actually brushed for the lugs, so that's something really gorgeous. The third watch that I have here by Zenith is the A3736. It's a subsea diver with inner revolving bezel. Pretty big watch for the time, quite square. You can tell it's a really late 60s. I believe this one was 1967, 68 from the production. What's cool about this one is that it does have the ladder bracelet, quite rare for the time and quite unique to the brand as well. They didn't make a lot of them, and it's also a chronograph, so it's actually something that was usable. Is it something I would dive with today? Most probably not. It's not the most waterproof watch, but it's something extremely rare. We don't see them that often, and being unpolished, being all original with the Zenith bracelet, it's just amazing. Why do I like Zenith so much? It has to do with its history, with the fact that they were trying to do their best among other brands. I think they were easily one of the competitors of Longines from the time. Longines did make amazing watches that were quite affordable for a lot of people. We do see a lot of them right now that are really rare. I do have one incoming, and you can actually follow in the next few weeks. I have a really cool Longines, by the way, that has to do with a lot of the history and heritage of the brand as well. We can talk about that when it's going to come. But Zenith is also something that has created very cool tool watches. We all know about the El Primero. The El Primero was the one watch that was, along with Benrus and the Seikos, they were among the first ones to be automatic chronograph. So you do have a lot of manual chronographs like this 146 movement that is manual wound, whereas you have the, just after this they came out with the El Primero movement that's actually automatic. The El Primero was really cool because they had a whole movement that was basically all integrated. The automatic part, the chronograph part, the plate, everything was integrated. It wasn't a module that was added like the Benrus movement from the time, which is the caliber 11, caliber 12 that we know today, and it was just basically a micro rotor movement, and they added a plate, which was not the case. And it was a very sturdy high beat movement, a very high beat at 36,000 bph, which is 36 beats per hour, which means that actually the watch is normally more accurate by the fact that it's beating at a higher rate, which means that it can more accurately adjust it. From my experience, I've had quite a few Zenith El Primeros in the past, and none of them were really off by that much in terms of functionality. Even if they were not serviced for a long time, they were still beating very strong and very well. Obviously, with a service, they do show that they're very strong movements. They're gonna last for not a lifetime. They did amazing things back in a time that are just I feel unbreakable. And that's why Zenith for me is just holding a very, very big place in my watch collecting and watch passion. The next brand that I really like a lot, and it might not seem the most obvious at first, but I do like Wittnauer. What I did talk about Longines, it's because I was preparing the path to actually talk about Wittnauer, which was the North American importer for Longines. What they did was some super cool watches, including the Wittnauer Professional that I have here. This is the 242T with the Vacheron 72. It does have a really cool case, pretty large for the time. The dial is reminiscent or very look-alike to a Nanicar Garnet, with the subdials that are almost mirror-like or glossy black. Very attractive watch, very unique. No one really made something that's as unique as this. And I do find that Wittnauer had a big place to actually grow for the best. But sadly, I mean, whatever is left of them is basically a few really good watches that are historic, that in terms of design and in terms of what they're using. So they're basically using a Vacheron 72, which was the same as a Daytona, which was the same as many other brands back in the time. They made almost 1 million of those movements back then. So those movements were actually used by a lot of brands, including Wittnauer. The second one that I have right here is another Wittnauer, which is called the Wittnauer Roulette. I've had quite a few of them in the past. This, I think, is my 4th or 5th one. This is actually super cool. It has a bakelite bezel, which actually just gives it a bit of a roulette wheel type of look. And it does have very striking colors. Back in the time, it was actually a dream to have one of those. Now that I've had quite a few of them, it's actually something that I'm actually selling along the way when they come in. But I do appreciate the quality. I do appreciate one that's actually unpolished. The case back is also untouched. It's all original, including the crown and everything else. I do love the fact that Wittnauer did get funky back in the 60s. They did choose to work with one of the best movements at the time. You had not that many choices. You had basically a La Mania, the El Primero, which was reserved to Zenith. You had the Excelsior Park movements, or the Zenith movements that were manual, or the Vacheron 72, which I think is a workhorse of movement. And again, going back to the Zenith Daytonas, which are still running strong today. Some people actually wore them for decades and decades. They're really, really cool movements to have. And I think that Wittnauer has integrated them in a unique way and easily recognizable by someone who actually knows about the brand. And I give it a big kudos to Wittnauer for actually having done a lot to the North American industry, to actually have done something that's very unique and very remarkable for the time. I can easily say that today Wittnauer is in dust and pieces compared to what it used to be in the time. Right now they're making fashion watches in a way that are really cheap watches. We talked about that in the past, but the brand did make cool stuff in the 50s, the 60s, and I do thank them for actually leaving those watches behind in terms of history. Wittnauer is just a shadow of what they used to be back in the time in terms of value, proposition, and quality of their watches. But if you look in the past, they do make some cool pieces, and I do suggest you look them up, or if not, come on the website and have a look. If you need more pictures, if you need any information, just ask me and I'll be more than glad to answer. The next brand that's super cool to me, and it's one of those brands that actually is finally revived, is the Universal Geneve. It's something that to me is holding one of the most important places in my heart for watches. It's because of its super cool designs from the 40s, the 50s, the fact that they did have a strong relation with aviation, with divers back from the 60s, and also they did some amazing, amazing chronographs until the 90s, and I have one of them here. We talked about it last week. This is one of their last chronographs back from the 1990s. This one just happens to be nearly unworn. It does have some handling or let's say, storage marks, maybe a few on the bezel or, little things, but overall it's in great shape. I was even thinking about keeping it for myself because it does have a perfect proportion for the time, and that's what I do respect about Universal Geneve. Back from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, they always did something that was unique to them. You could easily recognize them by the compacts, the Aero compacts, and so on and so forth. And the most important one is obviously the pole router, which was, again, we're going back to Girard-Perregaux. And right now, Breitling has bought the company. They have started to reproduce the original Girard-Perregaux design with their pole routers. They did have some failures back in the early 90s. Those watches are horribly designed. I just find that what comes today is maybe something for the future that's going to be very interesting. They did make 3 of them that are unique pieces with new old stock movements. The sad part is that the watches will not have vintage movements in them. The watches that they're coming up with, they will make actually a new micro rotor, but I think they're going to be in the $10,000 to $15,000 US range, which I think it's a bit high for what you get. I think that in the vintage world, you can still get cool UGs for a good price. They're still very underrated for the quality that they were using. At the end, they were using a 1873 Lemania movement. We talked about that in the past. Super cool stuff. But the problem today is that a company like Vacheron Constantin that has a very big hype around their movements, the FC 7000, which uses basically the same movement as the 284445, and it's in no way overhyped at all. And people should realize that certain movements are just as cool to have in a lesser known model as it would be in something that's a lot more publicized or a lot more advertised by companies. A lot of companies right now are just doing advertisement or talking about brands that are still alive or that are still generating a certain type of profit for them, which is what frustrates me, is that unless you read books, unless you're in contact with a dealer like myself who actually knows about those vintage pieces, you will never really be in contact with them. You'll never have the chance to actually even see one in person. And that's what's frustrating to me right now, is that everyone calls themselves a watch dealer and they don't deal with watches, they deal with 4 brands. So might as well call yourself an AP, Rolex, and Patek dealer, which is not really what this market should be about. There's so many other brands, and Universal Geneve is one of those that should be, or has to be, in one's collection if you really do like the brand. The one watch as well here that I have, and I've had it for a while, and it's extremely rare. So this one is the 22469 reference, and it does have rose gold lugs and a rose gold bezel. The case appears like it has maybe been touched up in the past, maybe, but overall the dial is still original. People don't realize that a lot of those 1930s, 1940s, 1950s watches that had basically snapbacks where you actually put some kind of a knife or a tool to actually pry open the case are actually more prone to have water damaged dials or water damaged movements. And in this case, the watch is still all original, which gives it a lot of value in terms of history, in terms of the fact that it resisted or it survived over the past roughly 80 years, more or less. So it's one of those watches that I do appreciate a lot, and people would have to understand how interesting it is to actually own pieces that have survived over 60, 70, 80 years in such condition. Is it perfect? No, it's not, but it does have a bit of bubbling on the dial, very minor bubbling, which is normal. After 80 years, we all would have a couple of bubbles ourselves and little problems. So in theory, I think UG should have never closed doors. I think it's one of those brands that has so much heritage, so much history, so many cool designs, and they did make the joy of a lot of people back in the past. And I would not pass on, into the fact that the brand is still doing amazing things. I've had an aerospace in the past that had the Vacheron 72 movement. They also do the Nina Rent, the Evil Nina, the Eric Clapton, you have the exotic dials, you have some really amazing and rare pieces that you never see on the market. And I find that UG is one of the brands that still has and still will have an amazing potential of collectability, of value for the price, especially the fact that vintage Daytona is still like super expensive. We're still looking the 50, 60, $80,000 US for Daytona, and the UGs are still far behind in terms of price, but quality wise they have nothing to cry about or be ashamed of. And you should actually just look it up if you don't know about its history. Just reading about it is just going to make you more and more aware of what the brand was actually doing. I'm gonna hit you guys hard with this one because I know a lot of people talk about the brand. That's something that's actually very important to me, to make you understand that in North America we do have a lot of love for certain brands. But if we look at Vacheron Constantin, I've had quite a few in the past. I do know that they're making amazing watches. I've had the Corne de Vache, which was an amazing chronograph. It was actually even based on a Le Mania movement, but very expensive for what it was. And I think that the vintage Vacheron Constantin is still very undervalued. They still make amazing pieces and unique pieces for the time. And right here I do have a ellipse like. The only difference between this one and an ellipse is basically the fact that it's a bit more angular and it does have lugs on the case. This one also has the original buckle back from the late 70s, and it's a manual wound, super thin watch. And a lot of people right now are going still for the AP of the same era, and I think that is actually offering the same quality, if not better. The whole part of Vacheron was that they were actually working with Gégé Lecoultre. Okay, they were working on the same movements, they were working with the same movements, so they're actually sharing really cool and very good grounding and quality to their pieces. What I find overall is that right now a lot of people, they're talking about the overseas, which is obviously something they were making for quite a while, but there's not only integrated bracelets right now, okay? All those really cool Calatrava-like and ellipse-like watches do have a great quality to them, including right here I have this one which has teardrop lugs. The case developed a really cool patina. It does have some kind of a, I would call it almost a nipple crown because it kind of bubbles up, but it's really easy to actually wind it. We can even hear it very well. This is one of the high grade movements of the time, very sturdy, very well made. The adjustments are very high quality. And this one does have as well, it's an unsigned buckle, but it is a Vacheron Constantin buckle. It's a newer one, but I have added this. The watch is worth it. It's of a very high quality make, and condition wise, we're talking of a watch that's unbeaten. That's not something that was abused or worn a lot. The dial is nearly perfect, and it does have a double color to the finishing, even though it's does look similar in the pictures we took, but it does have a lot of attention to the detail. And I find that the finesse of Vacheron is really worth the price. And again, if you're looking in the older ones, they did even better watches. The farther we get, I find that the better they were doing. And today, I think it's one of the watches and one of the brands that's still very undervalued. I'm not talking about the new ones, I'm talking about the vintage ones. There's still a lot of stuff that I haven't seen. I haven't seen a lot of chronographs by them from the 50s or the 60s locally in Montreal. We just don't see those. But when you see the quality of their craftsmanship, it's worth every single penny. And I find that you guys should open yourselves a bit more up to this. I find that Europe is very, very open to Vacheron, a bit less in North America. I think there's nothing more interesting than wearing your grandfather's watch or wearing something that was extremely classic back then, and that's never really going to come back, and it's never going to really go out of fashion. So for me, Vacheron is still doing some amazing things, but I think that vintage is just the way to go with them. And it's one of the brands that, even though people talk about, it's often easily forgettable. The one company that holds a lot of value and holds a lot of history is Girard-Perregaux. So they were founded in 1791. Their history is very long. You know, when you're talking of a company that has over 200 years of history, I think that it's something that should actually be looked into. They do have a lot of innovations as well. They did work, I was talking about Zenith with their high beat movements. They also did high beat movements. They do have a huge heritage and a huge background into watchmaking. They know what they're doing. They do have some amazing pieces, and I find that they still are among one of the brands that is very, very underwhelming and actually not showing its full potential. And I'm going to talk today about the Laureato line that they came up with in 2016. The original lineup was, I think, 225 pieces in different colors, different models. What I have here is basically the copper 38 millimeter. It's not listed yet on the website. This one is amazingly well designed, and I do find that I'm just looking at the rotors. We're talking, the rotor is so smooth. I haven't seen another watch that's so nice to look at in terms of design from the back. It's ultra thin in terms of the movement. Obviously, you do have the bezel, which makes it a bit thicker, but overall, I think it's a very nicely designed watch, even though it doesn't have necessarily the heritage of a Gerald Genta design. It does have something that's unique to them, and they made some really cool pieces. It's a design from 1975 by Adolfo Natalini, an Italian designer, that actually really came with the idea of an integrated bracelet for them even before the AP. So a lot of people do have that love and hate for the brand or for the design. Obviously, back in 1975, it was a bit questionable just because they did choose to go with a quartz movement, which obviously today they did choose to go with the rotor in this case, which is rose gold. But in most cases back in the time, it was quartz movements back from the 70s up to the 80s. But today they did something really well, and for the quality of the piece, for their integration, for the fact that they did remain with their own specific design, I think the company is doing something really well with this. And there is a lot of different choices that you can have within the line, and some of them are quite affordable, even I think in the 5,000 US if you're choosing the bigger versions of them or different colors of dials. I find that Girard-Perregaux overall is doing some amazing things. For the past maybe 10 years, 15 years, they have improved a lot. If we go a bit further back in the 90s or early 2000s, you have the Ferrari edition Girard-Perregaux. They call it the manufacturer movement. It's not okay. It's a 2892 chronograph, and they did integrate it very well. I find that this particular one, that was also my personal watch along with the Zenith, but this one is super interesting in terms of design. The integration of the bubbly case with the really edgy, almost architectural kind of bezel is really interesting. And the fact that the dial does have a lot of background of racing, of sports, of everything you want. We're talking of something that's very, very well designed in every single point. They're not all as sexy, they're not all as desirable, I find, look-wise, but overall, this one I do find that it's very attractive and still very affordable. I think we're asking something around the $2,000 mark or something similar. I just find that Girard-Perregaux was doing always something that's breaking the rules, that's unique to them, and they always try to stick to their beliefs in their own designs. Overall, I think that if you do choose, you do have some universal Geneves that you can pick up for really cheap. I think I have one right here. I have an ultra thin UG right here. This one is actually sold to a customer. So we're talking about something manual wound with a very classic design. I think this one is dating from the late 70s, and it's something that people should actually look into. Not everything is expensive, not everything is the models that everyone knows, and you don't have to spend tons of money on a brand to actually have their quality and the background and their history. Same thing for Wittnauer. I do think that Wittnauer do have a few good watches. Not everything is that interesting, but what they did in terms of 4 or 5 different models, including they did some really cool professional chronographs that are with the white dial. I've had a few of those. Their design was really amazing for the time, and it's easily forgettable when you see I'm gonna say their crap. Okay, it's Chinese movements, Chinese everything, and they're not even taking the time to actually go further and put actually an automatic movement or a chronograph movement. So when I'm talking about cheaply made watches, that's what I'm talking about. But the brand did make some really fabulous stuff. If we go to Vacheron, I think that the new stuff is somewhat desirable, but I think you're gonna have a lot more quality for your money in the vintage world and a lot more uniqueness. They did make some really cool dials, stone dials. They do have some heritage again with a mix of Le Coultre movements, and they did some really cool collaborations back in the 50s and the 60s. So even though in first appearance they look kind of boring, if you look into the details and if you look into a quality piece, you're not going to go wrong about the brand. And last but not least, the Zenith line. I think you're going to have a lot of history, you're going to have a lot of cool pieces, you're going to have a lot of affordable pieces on eBay that are way under $500, $1,000, that will offer quality, and honestly for the price, I think it's a steal. You do have a lot of heritage. Again, same thing. You're not gonna go wrong about the brand in any way. Obviously, if you're looking for something special, something vintage that's of very high quality, if you go for a caliber 135, they made some really basic ones from the Sporto 2000. So the Sporto 2000 was just a regular watch that used different movements, but in certain ones you might have a caliber 135, which is their most famous movement from a watchmaking perspective. But most people will know the El Primero for the fact that it was in the Daytona, for the fact that they still are using and making them today. But for the time, so you have the caliber 135 that was used in the Sporto and very classic chronometer, looking Calatrava cases. And then you have the third one, that's the most important one in the line, was the Port Royal, which I've had a few in the past. They're really rare. You have some Port Royal in stainless steel and in solid gold. If you buy a solid gold one, you're gonna have a solid gold dial as well. The quality of those pieces are amazing, but honestly, they only made 11,000 of those movements, so you might have a lot of problems finding them. If not, you can go with the 386, which is the three-color combination dial. You have anything in the 2-register, 3-register manual wound El Primero movements that are really desirable and extremely fun to own. Obviously, you have to try and find the one that suits you, that suits your budget. There's some recognition in the brand, not as much in North America, but I do find that the brand is very understated right now, especially for the low quantities of watches that they used to make or that they made back in the late 60s, early 70s, especially for the El Primero movements. They have a really cool selection of those. To finish off, if you've watched this far, I do have an auction on eBay with watches that have been staying for too long to my taste. Most of them are newer watches or modern watches in the past 20-25 years. I think one of the Breitlings is a bit broken up. I just bought it yesterday. A lady came in, I bought it, I put it up for sale. But in most cases, they're watches that have been checked, that are in really good condition. Most of them have box and papers, and you're gonna get somewhat of a deal because obviously it's an auction. If I lose, I lose. But if you're looking for something that was on my website and you're looking for somewhat of a deal, that might be it. My next move for the next year is going to be a bit different in terms of inventory, in terms of what I'm going to be offering. but that's what I'm doing. I always do a bit of a cleanup every 3 to 6 months because I always have new inventory coming in. And I do hope you guys bid if you do like anything, they're ready to be shipped. So anytime you actually buy anything in those auctions, normally I ship within 1 or 2 days. So be more than welcome if you like something. And please subscribe if you like the video. I think you're gonna be more than happy to actually have learned about certain one of those brands, and I'm gonna be trying to do more and more videos about this, just because a lot of people, including Hodinky, that was very, very interesting in the past about their about their openness to actually talk about vintage pieces, about something that was unique. Now it's less and less visible, and their impact in this industry is less and less visible for the vintage or the used market. And I find that this is actually the way to go right now in terms of buying something that's unique, that's going to represent you if you do a bit of research, and you're going to find the path to actually find that your own way. Hope you liked the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you, guys.